Okay. Torah speaks about a woman who conceives and gives birth to a male. And Gemara tells us, and Rashi mentions this, that it's very interesting. People don't know this. If you have a C-section and the child is born on Shabbos, the bris is not on Shabbos. Even though the eighth day is Shabbos, the bris does not override the Shabbos. Because over here, the Torah juxtaposes the laws of the woman being a menstruant to the circumcising the male on the eighth day. And the Gemara tells us in Shabbos that we see that only the woman who's subject to the laws of menstruation due to the birth, that child is circumcised on Shabbos. But a C-section, which the woman is not a menstruant due to the birthing process, that bris does not override the Shabbos. So a C-section, cesarean would not, that bris will not be on Shabbos. They're linked one to another. Now here it says she's contaminated as a what? As a menstruant. Is she menstruating? Is she not menstruating? So Mara tells us that a woman who gives birth, even if for whatever reason, it's hard to relate to it, if the woman is so malnourished that the child is born and there's no blood, the birthing process itself brings about the state of contamination. Now, until the Chet of Adam Rishon, there was no such thing as menstruation. As we mentioned, and Or Chaim HaKadosh speaks about here, because of the Chet of Adam Rishon, the foreskin grew on Adam, and the foreskin represents the evil that exists within mankind, or within the world. And menstruation, which is experienced by the woman, this is also a derivative of a consequence of the Eitz Hadas, the Ra. However, the male, if a non-Jew circumcises himself, which the Mishnah discusses, and is referred to as Arvi Mohol, a circumcised Arab. A circumcised Arab is considered the equivalent, although externally the foreskin was removed, his classification is still Orel. Orel is a person who has a foreskin. Why? The Mishnah tells us in the Dorim, what's supposed to, because Goyim, Gentiles are referred to as Arle Lev. They have an orlo on their hearts. There's this blockage. There's this covering on the heart. The heart is everything, is the sense. We sense things with our heart. That remains. So when you remove the outer foreskin regarding a non-Jew, it's purely cosmetic. It's cosmetic surgery. But in terms of the actual essence of the non-Jew, his spirituality is still shut down due to that representation of the evil within the Eitz Hadas. Avram Avinu was able to achieve within himself a level of spiritual development that at the age of 99, he was ready for real time, that when he would remove the outer foreskin, it would actually affect the covering of his heart to minimize the effect of the evil that exists within him. That was the mitzvah of Milah. And we find there's a linkage between Milah and Eretz Yisrael. When Avram was told to circumcise himself, and the land of Canaan will be yours and your progeny forever. What's the linkage? So over there, Rabbeinu Bachya explains, very interesting, Rabbeinu Bachya. You find historically that the Christians, the time of the Crusades, they tried to conquer Israel, and they ultimately were all killed. Why? Because a person who's not circumcised, the land will not tolerate that. Eretz Yisrael, which is Eretz HaKadosha, with the Holy Land, the Shekhinah is there, will not tolerate people who are not circumcised. And therefore, there's a linkage between being circumcised, the mitzvah of circumcision, Milah, that was given to Avraham Avinu, and therefore the land will be yours and your progenies. Because once you have the effect of the Milah and the external removal affects the internal, relieving the heart of that evil, now you have your presence is welcome. You have relevance to the Kedusha. You have relevance to the Shekhinah. The Arab, which is only partially circumcised, I'm quoting Rabbeinu Bachya, there's a difference between the circumcision of an Arab and the circumcision of a Jew. A circumcision of a Jew is Milah and Priya. We cut the foreskin, we peel it back. By the non-Jew, by the Arab, it's only Milah without Priya. If a Jew has, the Gemara tells us in Shabbos, what happens if a Jew has Milah and doesn't do Priya? It's Eino Moel. He's not considered circumcised. And the Gemara speaks about a case, a Moel, a child was born on Shabbos, and it's late in the day, and circumcision is only valid if you do it during the daytime, not the nighttime. And he started the Milah before Shkia, Shabbos afternoon. And they said to him, we don't know, and we don't think there's enough time to complete the Priya before Shkia. And the Moel says, I think I can do it. But he was right almost under the wire. And he's only able to do the Milah and not the Priya. It's considered he violated the Shabbos. That Moel violated the Shabbos. Why? Because the only, what overrides, what supersedes the Shabbos? If the child's state is considered circumcised. But since Milah for a Jew without Priya is not circumcision, he actually created a wound. For that, there's liability, there's Machal Shabbos. Therefore, that Moel, he's dismissed. The community dismisses him, and he's not qualified to be a Moel, because he's considered totally irresponsible. He violated the Shabbos, because it's not Milah. So Milah without Priya for a Jew is not Milah. For a non-Jew, like the Arab, Yishmael, there's a whole discussion. Yishmael, today, Yishmael, are they obligated to circumcise him? Are they not obligated to circumcise themselves? Yishmael. So the Arab who's partially circumcised, the land will tolerate him being there. However, when Mashiach becomes, where ultimately evil will be totally expunged from the world, even the Arab will not be qualified to remain in Eretz Yisrael. Because anybody who's not circumcised, as the Jews circumcised, if there's any remnant of that representation of the Eitz Hadas, you don't qualify to be in Eretz Yisrael. Only the Jews qualified. Because the Jew is fully expunged, that representation of the Arla is no longer there. Okay? That's the concept of Milah. There's a famous Medrash, or Chaim quotes it, but it's the Medrash Tanchuma. Rabbi Akiva would always debate the Roman governor. His name was Tonus Troppus, who ultimately he's the one who put Rabbi Akiva to death. And they'd always have public debates. And of course, Rabbi Akiva would always win the debate and make this person look like a fool. And he was made into a laughing stock. So this Tonus Troppus, they had this public debate, says to Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Akiva started the discussion. Rabbi Akiva asked Tonus Troppus, is man's action more perfect or God's action more perfect? So he says, and of course, Tonus Troppus was a pagan, but he was responding to Rabbi Akiva's position. He says, of course, God. If God's the creator, his action is more perfect. He says, I disagree. Man's action is more perfect. He says, I'll prove it to you. Rabbi Akiva is answering. If you have a kernel of wheat that grows out of the ground, even though it may be edible at a certain level, but if you take it, you thresh the wheat, you take the kernel, you mill it, you grind it, and you turn it to dough and you bake it into bread. What's more perfect, the finished product, the loaf of bread, or the kernel? So this Roman says, of course, the loaf of bread. So you see that man's action is more perfect than God's. God created an imperfect world, and it's man's objective to perfect God's world. Proof of this concept is the kernel to the finished loaf, baked loaf of bread. So Torah Strava says to Rabbi Kiva, which Rabbi Kiva set him up for the questions. He says, so if God created man with a foreskin, and it seems to be that's the profile of male, why does the Jew mutilate? Why does he remove the foreskin? Evidently, if the foreskin is meant to be there, why remove it? So Rabbi Kiva says, you don't understand. The foreskin is an imperfection in man. It's imperfection. And we remove it to perfect man. Man was created imperfect. The objective and the mission of the Jew is to perfect man. Therefore, we remove the foreskin. So the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh points out, Tony Shabbos didn't get this concept. This whole idea of there's spiritual impurity, there's a covering of the heart. He didn't get it. He understood the kernel to the finished loaf of bread. But removing the foreskin, that somehow that perfects man. Why is man more perfect when he has no foreskin? That he really didn't grasp. But in terms of ourselves, that is the impediment. That is the expression of the evil of Dei Tzadas covering. We don't see it clearly. Things are no longer black and white or discernible. There's confusion. That's the expression. That's the way it manifests itself. That's the foreskin. And that Orla represents the covering of the heart, which does not allow us to relate and sense right and wrong on an absolute level. That's the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh. Now, there's an argument, the Gemara Shabbos, we say, Kol HaMekalkel Peturin. Now, in Shabbos, if you do any one of the Lamites Melochos, and it's within the context of being destructive rather than constructive, you're not in violation of Shabbos. If you take some, it's called Mekalkel, destructive, not constructive. Because Meleches Machshev Sasher Torah. Because the Torah only says you're in violation of Shabbos if it's constructive. Because that's all learned from the Mishkan. The Mishkan, all the 39 creative activities, they were in the constructive context, not destructive. Samara says, so what about Netil's Neshama? What about extracting blood or causing a wound? Is that also constructive or that's destructive? So it's a machlokes Reb Yehuda and Reb Shimon. What is it? One of them says that that's the exception. Normally, to be in violation of Shabbos has to be constructive, cannot be destructive, can be mekalkel. Except Mila is the exception. Why? Why is Mila the exception? Because we find the Torah says Biyom Hashmini Yimel B'Sara also. This week's parsha. Biyom Hashmini, on the 8th day. The Torah could have said Bishmini, on the 8th day. What's Biyom Hashmini? Biyom means even if it's Shabbos, it supersedes Shabbos. Even if the 8th day Shabbos, but if it's Mekalkel, if it's destructive rather than constructive, what does the Torah have to tell us? Even on Shabbos, on a Torah level, you're not in violation if it's a destructive act. Therefore, that's a reason to say that's the exception. That although all of the malachos have to be tikkun, has to be constructive, the Netil's Neshama is the exception. Review this says I disagree. Disagree. It's tikkun gavra. When a Jew circumcises himself, that's like Makkah B'Patish. You're perfecting the Jew. The Jew assumes a perfected state. So by removing the foreskin, that's called a constructive act, not destructive. And therefore, we need a special Gzeres HaKosuf. Torah adds a word to tell us that even though normally it would be considered a violation of Shabbos, however, if the child is born on the 8th day Shabbos, that supersedes the Shabbos, even though it's a constructive act, because that's called Tikkun Gavra. The person is now in a perfected state. Now you've brought him to that perfect level in the physical sense. He no longer has the foreskin. That's the Gemara in Shabbos. He didn't understand this. This Tony Struppis didn't understand this. This Roman governor. He didn't understand the equivalent of the kernel to the finished loaf of bread to the Jew being circumcised. We find that by Shem raped Dinah. And afterwards, Shem, with his father Hamor, came to negotiate with Yaakov and his children that Dinah could stay with Shem. So they said, you realize not being circumcised for us is a disgrace. if you all circumcise yourselves, we'll marry one another, we'll become one people. And then when they circumcised themselves, Torah tells us the third day, when they were actually the most difficult day of recovering, Shimon and Levi went and they destroyed the community. They killed all the males. So the Rambam says, why did they kill the males? It was not genocide, chas v'shalom. Yaakov was upset with his children, and he says, the timing is not right. We're a handful of people. We're surrounded by all these nations, and acting irresponsibly, you're putting us all in jeopardy. But why wasn't it considered genocide? So the Rambam says in Hilchos Malachim, one of the 7 Noahide laws is dinim. That a person, they have to establish a judicial system. And if a person violates the 7 Noahide laws, he has to be put to death. Shechem, the prince, was not above the law. The community should have actually reined in on Shechem and put him to death when he raped Dinah. Raping Dinah, although she was a single woman, it's like violating her body, that's stealing. Would you have a right to violate someone else's body? So therefore, Shechem was subject to the death penalty. So wanted the community put him to death. So the community, the males of the community were in violation of dinim. Therefore, that justified them to destroy the community. Rameir Simcha of Dvinsk over there cites others that say, you know what the violation was? What if a Jew wants to do self-mutilation? Are we permitted to mutilate ourselves? The answer is no. Why? Because our bodies are not ours. Within the context of living responsibly, you're permitted. Person wants to do cosmetic surgery, which is perfecting the person, or some procedure which is necessary for our health. That's permitted. That's not called destructive. That's called improvement. That's rehabilitative. Therefore, you're permitted. But anything which is destructive, you're permitted. When the community of Shechem, they circumcised themselves. They did circumcise themselves because they wanted to be circumcised as God wants them, or they circumcised themselves for the sake of monetary reasons. Because Shechem wanted Dinah, and they said all the women of this family will be ours, that livestock will be ours. They did it for the wrong reason. Therefore, that was called mutilation. And because they mutilated themselves, they were all subject to death penalty, because they were in violation of what? Stealing, because damaging, where do you have a right to damage the body, to mutilate the body, because it was not done as a bris to identify with Hashem. That's where the others learn. So good. So for a Jew, Milah is Tikkun Gavra. It's Makah B'Patish. For a non-Jew, it's considered destructive unless he wants to do it for the sake of circumcision, to become a Jew. We'd asked the question, I remember we asked it when Yosef circumcised all the Egyptians before his family came to Mitzrayim. That was a prerequisite to be eligible to purchase grain. The Egyptians went and complained to Paro. He says, this man he's unstable. He's demanding things from us which are totally unacceptable. He only will give us the grain, sells the grain if we're circumcised. So Paro says to them, you people are responsible. He told you the famine is coming. You should have prepared during the 7 years of plenty for the famine. Why didn't you? He says, we did. So he says, so what happened? Yosef decreed that all our grain should rot. So we don't have grain. So we have to purchase it. So Paro says to his people, just as he agreed the grain should rot, if you don't follow his order, he'll decree we should all die. You better listen to what he says. As a result of that, Yosef had all these Egyptians circumcised. So when Yosef revealed himself, Ani Yosef over to Avichai, he showed his brothers he was circumcised. Maybe Ernie asked the question. I'm not sure who asked the question. So the question is, what's the proof he's Yosef? Every Egyptian was circumcised. All the males were circumcised. Yeah. So how did this prove that Yosef was Yosef? So it said then that Yaakov, the circumcision that was given to Abraham, was Milah without Priya. That's pre-Sinai. Sinai, the Milah of the Jew, which we discussed in this week's parsha, is Milah and Priya. Yosef's circumcision did not look like the circumcision where he had the Egyptians circumcise themselves. And they knew immediately, if Yosef's circumcision is post-Sinai, although it was pre-Sinai, it's clear an indication, a confirmation that he's the son of Yaakov, and this is Yosef. That's how we explained it, if you remember. The Moreh Nevuchim writes, it's brought the Rambam in the Guide for the Perplexed, that a person who circumcises himself, it curbs the sexual drive. If a person has a foreskin, the sexual drive is overwhelming. But if a person goes and removes the foreskin, that somehow tempers the sexual drive. Yosef, because he understood his family was come to Egypt, and the Egyptians were totally immersed in every level of promiscuity and licentiousness, he wanted to elevate them, that it should be a less permissive society. Therefore, we have them circumcised. That's how the Mefarshim learned based on the Rambam. So it's interesting, it was known fact that post-World War II, most Gentiles in the United States, circumcision, even non-Jews had themselves circumcised. And, in the United States in the 50s and up to the 60s, today it's not so common. Every child in the hospital was circumcised. He had his foreskin removed, usually by the gynecologist, by the obstetrician. He did the circumcision. The United States was pretty, compared to Europe and other parts of the world, it was less promiscuous than other parts of the world because it was tempered. Once that is not addressed, it's out of control. And this world today is out of control because the only people who circumcise themselves are Jews and not non-Jews. A woman has to contend with a menstrual cycle once a month. And the male, to deal with the consequence of Eitz Hadas is a one-time act. You circumcise, whatever that represents, that positive effect is immediate, and the male lives with that positive effect his whole life. A woman has to contend until she reaches menopause. Every month she's contending, she has to deal with the menstrual cycle, which is also a derivative, a consequence of the Eitz Hadas. It's interesting. The whole concept of death was introduced with the Eitz Hadas, right? Hashem had said, the day you will eat of the fruit, you'll be subject to death. The menstrual cycle is a life cycle, right? Every month, the woman goes and the ovum is what is cleansed out of the body. And again, it's rejuvenation of life. But that's life and death. That's the life cycle. Life is what? Is tumah. Death is contamination. So a woman has to contend with this every month. The male, you do one act on the 8th day of Yom HaShmini B'Sar Reloso, on the 8th day, you finish with it. He says, why? Because who initiated the Eitz Hadas? Chava. Adam, although he was responsible because he had told Chava, it was God's dictate not to even touch the tree, but factually, he was liable. But since he wasn't as culpable as Chava, therefore, a one-time act is enough to correct the consequence of the Eitz Hadas to the degree it could be corrected. But since she initiated it by offering the fruit, or almost demanding that he eats of that fruit, therefore she has to deal with this month in and month out for that reason. Okay, that's why she's subject to this level of contamination due to her reality, which the man is not. We mentioned the mitzvahs, which are, although male has the same mitzvah, but she has priority on the mitzvah. What are the two mitzvahs? One is the reality, nida, that only has relevance to a woman, but hadloka saner and hafersha chala, right? Lighting the Shabbos and Yom Tov candles and the tithing of the dough. Why? So if a wife always lights the candles, not the husband. If a man is by himself, he has an obligation to light the candles no less than the woman. But if your wife is there, the wife lights the candles, that's her priority. Tithing the dough, she bakes, that's her priority. She is mafresh challah. She tithes the dough. Why? So it's really the Gemara, but the Medrash says it more explicitly. He tima chalosa shalom. She contaminated. Challah is what is truma. That's holy, that's pure. She contaminated the challah of the world. Adam was a perfect person, nearly perfect. By offering him the fruit of the tree of knowledge, she took him down. He was the light of the world. He illuminated with the malachim, had confused his radiance to Hashem's. When she gave him that fruit to eat, it was extinguished, relatively speaking. She has an obligation to reignite, to rekindle that light. That's the symbolism of the lighting of the Shabbos candles and the tithing of those. She has to restore what she had removed. She extinguished the light of the world. She has to restore that light. She contaminated the challah. She has to restore the challah in its pure state. That's the reason why the woman has priority in these two mitzvahs. When it's a question of the man or the woman doing it, she does it, not him, for that reason. Tshuva is a mitzvah saseh. Do tshuva. Now, the Ramban writes, and it's one of the allusions to Elul, that what a Jew has to do in the month of Elul is Ani Ladodi Dodi Li. But one of the allusions to Elul is Umol Hashem es levavcha es levav zerecho. It's in Dvorim. Hashem will circumcise. Umol Hashem es levavcha es levav, it's Aleph Lamed, ves levav zarecho, and the hearts of your children. He will circumcise your heart, and this, what is that referring to? So if you look in the Ramban there, Ramban explains, it's speaking at the time of Moshe Mashiach. He says, what's the source and the cause of all sin? The Orlas Halev. When Adam had eaten of the tree of knowledge, before that, the whole concept of Bechira almost had no relevance to him. He had nothing drawing himself to evil. Once he ingested that, it created a covering of the heart, which he says, which is taiva, which is desire and passion, and everything emanates from that. That's the drive. At the end of time, Yemos Mashiach, Hashem will circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your children. This is referring to the Orlas Hapnimi. That's the covering of the heart. The external covering is only an indication, a representation that internally there's something which we have this blockage. So even after we're circumcised, it affects it to a great degree, but to be totally affected, we're not. Until Hashem expunges it and removes it, we're still subject, and that's what we're subject to the Yetzer Hara, and that's what we have Bechira for that reason. We have to contend with this tug of war between the physical and the spiritual until the coming of Mashiach for that reason. It tells us at the end of Shabbos that what happened at Sinai? What happened at Sinai? So initially, when Chava had eaten of Deitz Hadas and he had given to Adam, it says, the Gemara says, Bo Nochash al Chava Vital Bazuama. Literally, he sexually violated Chava. And the snake, which was the ultimate representation of evil, had infused it within her, this spiritual pollution. So that means the mother of all mankind, every child that was born from the woman, because every woman is a descendant of Chava, has that impurity within her, and that impurity carries on to every child. When we were at Sinai and we were exposed to the Shekhinah, it says Posca Zuamosa, that Zuma, that spiritual pollution, was totally vaporized. And so was the what? The evil of Deitz Hadas. And we would have been eternal if not for the Chet Egel. As a result of the Chet Egel, we reverted back to what? The Zuma, that impurity of the snake, that was vaporized. That did not come back. But the evil of the Deitz Hadas, that was reactivated within us. So Bechira we have, but the extreme level of being totally entombed in impurity, we don't have that. Because that's Posca Zumoso. The experience at Sinai vaporized that and removed that, never to come back again. Therefore, as a result of that, we have Taryag Mitzvos. Meaning, to be able to have control within all these areas of our life. 248 positive commandments, 365 negative commandments. A non-Jew doesn't have the wherewithal to take control of himself because all the blockages he has and the sensitivities that one needs to be able to, a non-Jew doesn't have that. A Jew has that. It's within his ability that if he could rein in on himself. Because it was Poskus Umosa. By the non-Jew, there's no Poskus Umosa. That Zuama, that spiritual pollution, that's part and parcel of what they are. We're going to read the laws of Tzaras, of leprosy. It says, if you find Ba'or B'Soro Nega Tzaras, that's the text. You find Ba'or B'Soro. On the skin of your flesh, you have Nega Tzaras, this lesion, leprous lesion. So the Rechaim HaKodesh asks a question. What does it say? Ba'or B'Soro. B'Soro. You find the leprous lesion on your flesh. Why is it on the skin of your flesh? We don't understand it. It's external. So it means the flesh. It means the skin. What does the Torah have to write? Or B'Soro? To be so depictive of where? So he says, a Jew, chet is only superficial. As we say, skin deep. The essence of the Jew is pure. It's only circumstantial that we somehow have this slippage. A non-Jew, his bosser is tzaras. His essence is a representation of that evil. The Jew, because of the Sinai event, what happened? It's only circumstantial that we fail. But it's not our essence. Therefore, it says or besor rather than besor for that reason. And that's only because what happened at Sinai, which the non-Jew never had that. And therefore, the goy is or arle leiv. Even if they do circumcision, it's purely cosmetic. The essence is that it's embedded in their hearts. Uvayom hashmini yimo b'saro loso ushloshim yom shloshes yom teisha b'nei Torah. For 33 days, as I said, when the woman gives birth, she's contaminated for 7 days. And normally, if a woman menstruates, even if she sees as much as a droplet of blood, she's contaminated for 7 days. What happens? She menstruates for the full 7-day period, and she stops after 7 days. She goes to the mikveh, and she's relieved of that contamination. Whether it's, the Gemara says it's tipa kechardel. The drop of blood she sees is no more than larger than a mustard seed. She assumes the classification of nida. She's a menstruant. On the eighth day, she goes to the mikveh. If she bleeds, menstruate throughout that period, and she stops at the end of 7 days, she goes to the mikveh. If she goes beyond the 7 days, she's contaminated because she's still menstruating. Takes on another status, whatever it is, but same level of contamination. But the woman who gives birth, even if she continues to bleed beyond the 7th day, she still goes to the mikveh after 7 days. And for 33 days, even though she's still expressing blood, and the blood, the Gemara says, is the same blood that comes from the uterus. It does not contaminate her. Xeris HaKosov. That there's machloks in the Gemara, the blood that comes after birth, is it uterine blood or is other blood? And that's but we rule halacha. It's the same mayond. It's the same source. Except the Xeris HaKosov, 7 days she's contaminated. The 33 days, she's not, that blood no longer contaminates her. A female will see it's double. 14 days contamination, 66 days, even if she continues to bleed, she's not contaminated until the 81st day, and here until the 41st day, if it's a male. Shloshim yom, shloshes yom, teisha b'nei Torah. She's in the state that the blood is Torah, does not contaminate her. B'chol kodesh lisiga, but nevertheless, she's not permitted to engage in what? In kodesh. means she's not permitted to eat if she's, let's say she's a Bas Kohen, or let's say she's the wife of Gosh, she's not permitted to eat Truma. B'chol Kodesh Lusiga ve'al Hamikdash Lusovo. She's not permitted to go into the Beis Hamikdash until she completes the days of her purity, meaning until the 41st night, and she'll have to bring a korban. Only then, and she goes to the mikvah. Only then is she permitted to eat the truma and to go into the Beis Hamikdash. So over here, there's a famous Sefarno that, I mean, why during this period of time is she not permitted to go into the Beis Hamikdash? Or not, right? I mean, factually, it's the May Torah, so evidently she's still experiencing the recovery process. So he says something interesting. You know, in life, focus is crucial. A woman, after she gives birth, she's still contending with that experience. And as a result, her mind is fully focused on herself, on her recovery. And it has to do with the reproductive. That itself doesn't allow her to focus on spirituality. It's a distraction. And because of the level of distraction, therefore, it's not appropriate to her engage in anything of Kodesh, to go into the Beis Hamikdash, or to what? Because the mind is totally immersed or attached to that experience. That's the way he explains it. And without it, you say, it's like the halach is a Kohen comes in contact with a source of contamination, goes to the mikveh, he still has to wait till nightfall before he actually is permitted to eat truma, right? The first mission in Brachos, right? Only nightfall, that's called, he's a Tful Yom. The woman who gives birth, she's called a Tfulas Yom Oruch. She, waiting till the end of the day is not enough. She has to wait till the end of 40 days. That's when, after going to the mikveh, on the 8th day, that's when she's permitted to be fully reinstated purity-wise. Like the Kohen, after he goes to the mikveh on the day, he's not permitted to engage with truma immediately. He has to wait till nightfall, because that's called Tful Yom. Because he went to the mikveh today, he has to wait till the next day. She has to wait till the next day. The next day is after this period of time, which is the 41st night or the 81st or day when she brings her korban. Alan, I see you have Mimos Imei Torah, and when she completes the days of purity, meaning the menstrual blood, which does not contain leben or lebas, Tavi keves ben shnoso lo'olo. She brings a keves, a sheep, ben shnoso lo'olo, uben yona otor lechatos. And the dove, or the turtle dove for chatos, a pesach moed. Pesach moed el kohen. So here there's an interesting Balaturim. The Balaturim says, normally in the Torah, it always mentions, when it mentions birds, there are only one species of birds qualifies for a korban, Tor and Yona. It's turtle, dove, and dove. It's the same species. It always says Tor before Ben Yona. Here it says Ben Yona and then Tor. We'll see. So he says over here, Yona, Chutz Mikan. This is the only exception. Ben Yona is mentioned before Tor. Over here, normally when you bring birds, you bring two birds. One is a chatos, one's an ola. Over here, the animal is the ola, and the bird is the chatos. So you're bringing one. Normally, you always bring a pair. One is the chatos, one's the ola. Okay? So here you're only bringing one. The mimsa yona lo sikach tor. If you have a Yona, you don't bring the Torah. If you have that, Fisha ben Zugo, Misabel Lolov, Vedu Misdavik Lacher. Because its mate mourns for it and will not engage with another bird, with the other species. The Gemara says closer or compared to Bnei Yona. What's a Yona? Yona, a dove is faithful to its mate. Any other bird is involved with multiple mates. The Yona is faithful to its own mate. So let's say its mate dies. It will not be involved with another bird, another of the same species. And that's what the Gemara says. Just as the Yona is faithful to its mate, Klal Yisrael are faithful to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we don't leave him to go to do what to believe in other things. So he says over here, since you're only bringing one, so what happens to its mate? Im Yimtza Yona, Lo Sikach Torah, Fisha Ben Zugo, Misabel Olav, Venim Zdavag Lachem. Okay?
Don't you usually bring the sin offering first, then the elevation offering?
That's separate.
It's reverse.
Right, correct.
What's the reason for that?
1 second. Just want to